All right, in this video, we are going to solve the following quadratic equation: 20x squared plus 3x equals 108. So when you have this equation, just identifying it as a quadratic, right, because it has that squared term there, we have x squared, and then just x on this term, and then no x over here. So it is a quadratic equation because primarily, right, we've only really studied linear and quadratic so far. So, and rational, right? So this one is not rational because it doesn't have fractions. So of the two, right, between linear and quadratic, with that exponent, it has to be a quadratic. All right, so, and that's important because you're going to use slightly different methods, right, to solve linear versus quadratic. What you would want to do, right, for a quadratic is to get 0 on one side and all of the other terms on the other side. All right, so the easiest way to do that here is to subtract 108 from both sides. I need to write it over here. So over on the left hand side, I would get 20x squared plus 3x minus 108 equals 0. Okay. All right, so next up is I want to factor this as much as possible. So looking at this, the numbers, I have 20 and 3. Right off the bat, they don't have any common factor, right? 3 and 20. So number wise, the greatest common factor is going to be 1. And then there's no x. None of them have, this 108 doesn't have an x. So the greatest common factor here is 1, which is not going to help anything. All right, next up, looking at the number of terms I've got 3 terms here. And so to factor this, I'm going to try to use the AC method. All right, so in the AC method, I'm going to be looking for two numbers that multiply together to give me 20 times negative 108. All right, which is a huge number as far as trying to figure that in your head. So make sure I write this correctly. So I get minus 2160 on this. Okay. So I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to give me negative 2,160, right? And that add up to give me positive 3. Okay. So that is one of the downsides of the AC method, is that, you know, you're going to, that's going to take a while to like search through that list. But it's really not a downside because you're going to have to do it no matter what, right? To look for factors. So normally the way I've been showing you how to do that is, you know, you start with 1 times 2160, right? And then 2 times whatever that's going to be, 1080, and so on and so forth. You can see though, right, we're looking for 2 that add up to give 3, right? So if this number is really big and this number is relatively close to relatively small, that pair is going to be way down in this list. And if you do it the way I was showing you before, I mean, with a calculator, it still doesn't take too long, right? But if you do 2160 divided by 1, divided by 2, divided by 3, it still could take a while, right, to go through, especially if it has a lot of factors. So I'm going to show you a trick, right, on that. The number is going to be way down in that list, okay? So the trick is, if it's way down in the list, if you want to start searching these list of factors the other way, take the square root of that number. So if I do square root, oops, if I could spell square root 2160, I can see that that is 46 point something, right? So if you start at 46 and go down, right, the next number down would be 46 doesn't go in evenly, right? But if you start going down, then you see the next number right there is 48. And you can see, hey, that's a difference of 3, right? So all the way at the very end of this list is going to be 45 times 48, and that's going to be the one to work out. So that's just a helpful trick. If this number is really big and has a lot of factors, but this number is really close to 1, right? Then you can try that trick with the square root. Take the square root of that number and then start at the whole number part of it, 46, and then work your way back down, right, till you find something. So 45 and 48 look really promising here. So I'm going to take a look at those. So 45 and 48. These two numbers, when I multiply them together, they have to be negative, right? So one's going to be positive, and one's going to be negative. That's the only way I can multiply two numbers and get a negative, right? And then the bigger one should be positive, right? Because when I add them, I want to get a positive 3. So those two numbers are negative 45 and positive 48. So let's just take a look at that and verify. Negative 45 times a positive 48 is negative 2160, right? And negative 45 plus positive 48 is a positive 3. So those are the two numbers that I'm looking for. Okay? All right, next up, I would split the middle term up using those two numbers, minus 45x plus 48x minus 108 equals 0. All right, and then factor by grouping. So looking at these two, you can see what they have in common. So that would be a, let's see, would be a 5, right? So 5 and an x. So 20 divided by 5 is 4, and then pulling out an x from x squared gives me an x. And then negative 45 divided by 5 is negative 9, and then that x is factored out. And then I'd have that plus, all right, and then 48 and 108, what they have in common. Looks like 6 for sure, right, would go in there. So 48 divided by 6 is 8, right? And 108 divided by 6 is 18. We can see, right, that actually, yeah, it's 12, right? 12 goes into both of those. And so we can see 12, right? 4 and 9 have nothing in common, right? So that's the number that the greatest common factor of those two. So we would pull out a 12. 12 goes into 48 4 times. We'd have that x in there. 12 goes into negative 108 negative 9 times, and that's perfect. That's exactly what we want. And like I said, I told you before that if you find these two numbers, and then it's going to work out. So we kind of knew that this had to be a 4x and a 9 in there as well. All right, next up, factor by grouping, right? I'm going to pull out the 4x minus 9 and out of these two terms right here. And if I pull a 4x minus 9 out of this first term, I'm going to get a 5x. And if I pull it out of this second big term, I'm going to end up with a plus 12, like so. All right, and so now I have this left side is factored as much as possible. These can't be factored any further. And I've got 0 over on the right-hand side. So that tells me that either 4x minus 9 is 0 or 5x plus 12 is 0. Right? Because if I multiply these two and I get 0, one or the other or both had to be 0. All right, and now we just solve each of these two linear equations. So get x by itself on one side, and then divide. So get x equals 9/4. On this one, we would subtract 12 from both sides to get 5x equals -12. And then divide both sides by 5. We get x equals -12/5. So our two answers are 9/4 and -12/5. Like so. All right, that's it for this example.